Today's talk's topic is continue in God's love. We're going to examine a few characteristics that we should not practice or have within us if we want to continue in the love of God. We're going to read 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 9, 10. Did you not know people who practice wrong will not be part of God's kingdom? Do not wrong yourself. The ones who are sexually immoral, idolater, adulterer, homosexual, thief, greed, drunks, reviler, extortion will not be part of God's kingdom. Continue in God's love. The first way to continue in God's love is to love God. How can we love God? We're going to read Philippians chapter 2 verse 3. It reads, "Do nothing out of ego. With a low mind, see others superior to you." What does it mean to have an ego? To have an ego means to be in a higher state of mind and not considering others before you. For example, Adam, the first man that was on earth, had an ego after he sinned. He wasn't in God's disposition. He was relying on his own thought. To continue in God's love, according to Philippians 2 verse 3, we need to have one good quality, and that is humility. To put yourself in a low mind, seeing others superior to you. Continue in God's love. The first step is to love God. We show we love God by showing humility. How do we show humility? The way to show humility is not practicing ego. One way we practice ego is when we celebrate our birthday. A birthday can be when somebody turns a certain age or when somebody reach a graduation, they're celebrating their success, or they can celebrate how long they've been together with someone. The goal is not the celebration itself, but are we developing an ego? We are going to read Romans 12 verse 3. It will show us a way to show humility. It reads, "Do not think of yourself. Have a sound mind." Why does it say to have a sound mind? Because once we have an ego, we are not on our right mind. We think we're equal to God. We think we're higher than God. It's not true. Is it wrong to celebrate your birthday? The goal is not to think of yourself. We have an example in the Bible where Abraham had a milestone celebration for Isaac. He was a baby, now he turned one. You can see that Abraham wasn't thinking of himself, Isaac wasn't thinking of himself. The goal is not to think of yourself. We're also going to read Galatians chapter 6 verse 3. It reads, "If anyone thinks he is higher when he is nothing, he is deceiving himself." When you have an ego, you are thinking about yourself. You are lying to yourself because ego does not show love for God. You don't put yourself in a godly disposition. When it comes to continuing in God's love, another way to show humility or not practicing ego is when it comes to having big parties. It can be a wild party. All parties can be wild. That means it doesn't have any discipline to it. It's loud. It does not honor God. You can have a wedding party that's not honorable to God. If it is extravagant, if it makes other people feel lower, if it contains alcohol. It's not wrong to drink alcohol. Do you make it your main drink? In Galatians chapter 5:21, the Bible mentions certain characteristics that are not good for spiritually minded people, like drunkenness, wild parties. These are considered in the Bible as works of the flesh. Works of the flesh mean you are against the Spirit of God. You might be a spiritually filled man. If you practice these things like wild parties, drunkenness, you will depart the Spirit of God from you. To continue in God's love, we show love for God by guarding our speech. We can think of guards like people back in time that carry swords. They were alert. Guarding our speech means whenever our speech is threatening to our soul, we cut it with a sword. We're going to read Colossians chapter 3 verse 8. It says, "Cut them bad speech, obscene talk out of your mouth. Do not lie." What is obscene talk? It is speech that is repulsive. It sounds bad to other people's ear. It will rot your heart. We're going to read Ephesians 4 verse 29. It says, "Let not a decay word come out of your mouth." What is when something is decaying? Like a dead body, like a bad fruit. You see worms coming out of it. Is it pleasing to look at? No. Are you going to eat it? No. Because if you do eat it, it might have adverse effect. It might affect you badly. Continue in God's love means we show we love God when we get married. Marrying meaning considering someone as a life partner. We have to make a public declaration before God because He is the one who established marriage. In Genesis 1 verse 28, it talks about Adam and Eve. It says God marries them. To be married means to be joined by the Spirit of God. To continue in God's love, you have to love yourself. One way to show you love yourself is not practicing sexual immorality. What is sexual immorality? Sexual immorality is unclean sexual acts. We're going to read Romans 1 verse 24. It says, "God, in keeping with the desires of their hearts, gave them up to uncleanness, so that their bodies might be dishonored among them." Sexual immorality is unclean sexual act. Love yourself to continue in God's love. We're talking about sexual immorality. What is sex? Sex is an act between a man and a woman. It's when the man's penis goes into the woman's vagina. Sexual immorality is practicing sexual acts that are bad or not clean. Some example of sexual acts that are not clean is having sex without being married. When a guy penis goes into a woman's anal, the hole on the back of the female. When a guy penis goes into another guy anal. When a woman's vagina is rubbing against another woman's vagina. When a woman's mouth goes into another man's penis. When a man's mouth goes into a man's penis. When a man's mouth goes into a woman's vagina. When you excite your own sexual organ or masturbation. Either the man is beating up their sexual organ in a sexual way to excite themselves, or a woman is exciting themselves by rubbing or touching their private area. It doesn't limit to grown people. It can be a child, it can be a young man, a young woman. When you have sex change or surgically replacing your sexual organ, sexual thoughts, sexual acts with animals or object that is away from God's purpose, like sex toys or a stick or anything you find either for the men to excite their sexual organ or for the woman to excite their sexual part, or using that, you can also use that to excite an animal. All these things are considered sexual immorality. Continue in God's love. Love yourself. Does that mean when you're married, you are free from sexual immorality? We're going to read Romans chapter 1, verse 21. It reads, although they knew God, they did not glorify him. Instead, they became empty-headed in their reasoning, senseless. Someone who is married can still practice sexual immorality. If you lie down with someone other than your husband or wife, that is sexual immorality. Having sex with your husband or your own wife can also be sexual immorality if we are not being led by the Spirit of God. The Bible calls it the practice of the flesh. Talking about sex in a bad way, in a way that is uncomfortable for other people or even the person you're having the conversation with to hear, is sexual immorality. As a married couple, practicing certain sex position can also be works of the flesh, like wheelbarrow, doggy styles, bondage. When we do that, we may be putting our heart in a vulnerable position to accept just anything that comes at us. This kind of act is not clean for a spiritual man or a spiritual woman. Also, as a married person, are you embarrassed by the act? Because if you are being led by God's Spirit, you shouldn't feel embarrassment. Do you feel shame on your body? It's not just having a bad view of yourself. Maybe because the person you're having sex with doesn't make you feel comfortable. And somewhere in your mind, it may not be the way to act, it may not be the right act, or it may not be the right thing to do. Although you are married, which is the first step you should take before having sexual intercourse, you have to be led by God's Spirit. It is not a private matter. To continue in God's love, you have to love yourself, not practicing sexual immorality. Homosexuality is sexual immorality. What is homosexuality? Homosexuality is when a man and a man have sexual act, or when a woman and a woman have sexual act. We're going to read Romans chapter 1, verse 27. The male leave the natural use of the female and become passionately inflamed in their desire toward another male, working what is repulsive, receiving in themselves the full punishment for their reasoning. What does it mean to receive a punishment for your reasoning? Meaning that thinking that being a man with a man is right, or a woman and a woman is right. Does that mean you're going to hell? When a man goes into another man, one male put their penis into another male's butt. What's wrong with that? We are not perfect. We are not all clean. We have fecal matters in our butt. So when a male go into another male butt, you are taking in bacteria from the male. That bacteria can spread as microbes, which can lead to diseases such as HIV or AIDS. When a woman rubs their vagina against another woman, they have vaginal fluid that also can be spread microbes, which can lead to sexual diseases. Sexual diseases are not limited to that. Any immoral act that we mentioned earlier, like sucking the man's penis, can lead to sexual diseases. Why do we have the tendency to practice homosexuality? It's because we are imperfect. We're going to read Romans 3, verse 23. It says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. When we have that tendency in us, if we don't have God's Spirit, we may not be able to control it. Therefore, we go and practice it. When it comes to continuing in God's love, you have to love yourself. We're going to talk about virginity. Virginity is not limited to having sexual intercourse, but it starts with our thoughts. We're going to read James chapter 1, verse 14, 15. It reads, each one is led by their desire. Their desire, when it sprouts, results to sin. Sin, when it carries out, results in death. Being a virgin is not limited to having sexual intercourse. It starts with our thoughts. The thoughts can come from the things we watch, the music we listen to, what we hear other people say. When you are masturbating, it can lead to uncontrolled sexual act, like raping someone. What is raping? Raping is when you have sex with someone else without controlling yourself and not considering them. For a young person, is having sex bad? Are you continuing yourself in God's love? Having sex unmarried is considered a sin or a black mark before God. As a young person, you may not be physically, emotionally, or mentally ready to have someone else communicating with your body. That can lead to self-destruction. It will have a powerful effect on your mind. After having sex with someone, you may feel worthless. You may want to commit suicide because you dishonor your body. A simple sexual act like kissing someone, touching yourself, letting someone else touch you without communicating a clean spirit into you can be a sexual immoral act. We're going to read Bible verse. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 18. It says, run away from sexual immorality. A man who practices sexual immorality is sinning against their own body. Having sex young, having sex unmarried can be destructive, physically, emotionally, mentally. What about young children? How can you continue in God's love? You can continue in God's love by loving yourself. Loving yourself means not practicing sexual immorality. Some children might be curious to know what it feels like to have sex, or they might want to look at another person's private part, either a boy, either a young person, or either a grown person. Although as a child, God holds you responsible for your action. In Romans chapter 14, verse 12, it says, each of us is responsible before God for their action. You cannot blame being young as a reason to practice sin. You cannot blame your parents or anyone else for not teaching you about morality. Because in Proverbs chapter 20 verse 11, it says, a child know his action, whether his behavior is pure, whether his behavior is right. You can't say, I am just a kid, I can do that, or I did not know. Because God creates us with a sense of right and wrong. When continuing in God's love, we have to love ourselves when it comes to eating and drinking. Do we need to eat all the time? We're going to read Matthew chapter 4, verse 4. Jesus answered, "It is written, man must not live on food alone, but on every word that comes from God." For God's Spirit to reside within us, we must not think about filling our soul with physical, material things. For example, eating and drinking. When it comes to eating and drinking and remaining in God's love, we can think about Anna from the Bible, from the New Scripture. Luke chapter 2, verse 37. It reads, Anna was never missing from the temple, giving sacred services night through day with fasting and prayers. What is fasting? Fasting is resting our soul from material things like food so we can allow God's Spirit to reside within us. Continue in God's love. Love yourself. Why should we not think only about eating, drinking? Let's read Proverbs 30, verse 8, 9. It says, "Let me consume a small portion, so that I do not become satisfied and deny you and say, who is God?" When we get our fill to eat, drink, we may not think about God's Spirit anymore. We may become satisfied in our hearts. We may become arrogant, meaning that we might feel like we don't need God anymore because we have what we need. How can you continue in God's love? Is to love your neighbor. Let's read Romans chapter 12, verse 10. It says, "In respecting other, love yourself." What does that mean? That means you should be the first one to show respect and not expecting others to show you respect. Let's read another verse. Matthew chapter 5, verse 24. It says, "First, make your peace with your brother." To continue in God's love, we must not be a person who is ready to fight. You should be always making peace with your neighbor. Don't wait for them to come to you and apologize. Make the first move. You may ask yourself, what if my neighbor is unbearable, annoying, hard to deal with? Let's see what advice the Bible gives us in Colossians chapter 3, verse 13. It reads, "Continue putting up with one another, forgiving one another freely." Even if your neighbor may not be the person you like, or the neighbor always getting under your skin, the Bible says to put up with that, forgiving them freely. Does that mean you allow yourself to receive bad treatment? No. It means that you have fear of God. By having fear of God, you take the initiative to make peace with your neighbor. Let's read Matthew chapter 7, verse 3. Jesus said, "Why do you look at the straw in your brother's eyes, but do not notice the rafter," or you can say a big pole, in your own eyes? So instead of pinpointing every little thing about your neighbor, it can be your son, your daughter, your stepdaughter, your stepson, your stepmother, your own mother, father, anyone. Instead of pinpointing errors in them or the things they are doing wrong, we should be focusing on respecting ourselves, loving ourselves. Continue in God's love by imitating Jesus' example. Philippians 2, verse 5 says, "Keep Jesus' mentality." What mentality did Jesus have? Let's open our Bible on 1 Peter 2, verse 23. It reads, when he was being insulted, he did not insult. When they made him suffer, he did not threat. Jesus did not render eye for an eye. He was a peaceful person. Another verse to imitate Jesus in order to remain in God's love is in John chapter 4, verse 34. Jesus said, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Jesus did not fill himself up all day with eating, drinking, partying. He was a spiritual man.